never wanted to work for the family company. Following honors in financial management from college, my aspirations were focused on leaving my own impression in the business world. Having already showed interest in my resume, several esteemed companies thrill me about starting from nothing in terms of my career. But other plans called for life. Alice Chen is my name. I was always the conscientious one. Tommy, my older brother, was the golden child with no wrongdoing capacity. He acquired the most modern devices, the most elegant clothing, and, above all, our parents' whole attention. Early on, I became self-sufficient. I threw myself into academics and worked part-time at our company in the summers to make my own money. For 3 generations, our family had Chen Global Trading, starting it with just 2 cargo containers of Taiwanese electronics. My great-grandfather. It had developed into a solid mid-sized business managing imports from all throughout Asia by the time my father assumed control. From my summer work, I know the business both inside and outside, but I never imagined I would be operating it. Tommy was meant to have that. One evening, my father remarked, "Alice, we need to talk," his voice unexpectedly solemn. Over supper at his office, I had just completed informing him about a great interview with Goldman Sachs. "What is wrong, Dad?" Worrying his face, he waved for me to take a seat. "The business isn't performing great. Faster than ever before, we are losing money." My gut grew tighter. Tommy seemed to be learning the ropes. You often said he would take over. Dad's face turned red with humiliation. "Your brother, he is not ready. He expense reported yesterday a $5,000 supper with customers at the newly opened French restaurant. He couldn't recall a single detail when I asked him about the company under discussion. And what relevance this has to me? Though I could already tell where this was leading, I asked. "I need you to take over as CEO, he stated, not elaborately. "You know the business, are smart, responsible. The business depends on you, Alice." I sat there, startled. I had been informed years ago that Tommy's birthright was this. Suddenly, he lost control, and they wanted me to intervene and straighten things out. What about my own plans of employment? I voiced opposition. "Dad, I worked very hard for this. I have scheduled meetings for interviews." "This is our family's legacy," he interrupted, his voice shaking somewhat. "Your great-grandfather started this firm from nothing. Are you actually going to let things fall apart?" I studied the ancient black and white picture on his wall, my great-grandfather proudly facing his first warehouse. 3 generations' weight of family history crushed down on my shoulders. I said at last, "Tommy won't like this." Dad grumbled. "Let me handle your brother. Are you going to do it?" I watched my well-thought-out future vanish out the window at the metropolitan skyline. Indeed, I found myself saying, "I shall do it." My first day running Chen Global Trading was dreamlike. Walking through the familiar hallways, I was greeted by faces I'd known since I was a teenager running errands and filing paperwork during summer breaks. I spent the next 2 weeks buried in financial reports, my financial management degree finally proving useful in ways I hadn't expected. Mrs. Rodriguez, our head of accounting, and her team were invaluable, providing me with years of records and explaining various accounting practices that had become standard under my brother's influence. "I hate to show you this," Mrs. Rodriguez said one evening, placing a thick folder on my desk, "but you need to see where the money's really going." The numbers told a story of systematic mismanagement and wasteful spending. But it was when I started digging into the expense reports that my blood really began to boil. The documents revealed a pattern of excessive spending that made my stomach turn. An $80,000 Tesla Model S purchased 6 months ago under transportation expenses. A $112,000 monthly rent for a penthouse apartment in downtown listed as client entertainment facilities. A $25,000 shopping spree at Armani somehow classify as professional development expenses. Has my father seen these reports? I asked Mrs. Rodriguez. She shook her head. Tommy always had a way of presenting things differently to your father, more vaguely. The details got buried in broader categories. I stayed late into the night, poring over every detail. The more I looked, the more I found. Weekend trips to Vegas labeled as client relationship building. Designer suits and watches filed under professional image maintenance. The company was bleeding money through 1,000 expensive cuts, all traced back to my brother's spending habits. By the end of my audit, I had made my decision. I drafted a new company expense policy, one that would eliminate all these excessive privileges. Everyone, including Tommy and myself, would operate on base salary alone. No more luxury cars, no more penthouse apartments, no more shopping sprees disguised as business expenses. As I finished typing the last page of the new policy, I glanced at the old black and white photo of my great-grandfather on the wall. I'm going to fix this, I promised him silently. Whatever it takes. Knew the storm was coming. Tommy wouldn't take these changes lying down. But I had the numbers, the documentation, and most importantly, the authority to make these necessary changes. Let him try to justify $1,200 swimming trunks as a business expense to my face. I was reviewing supplier contracts when my office door burst open with such force that it bounced off the wall. Tommy stormed in, his face red with rage, waving a copy of the new expense policy I distributed that morning. "What the hell is this?" he shouted, slamming the document onto my desk. "You think you can just walk in here and take everything away from me?" I kept my voice steady. "These are necessary changes to save the company, Tommy. You've always been jealous of me," he spat. "Always trying to prove you're better than me, and now you're using Dad's temporary insanity to push me out." "No one is pushing you out," I said. "But the company can't afford to bankroll your lifestyle anymore." "My lifestyle?" He laughed bitterly. "I bring in half-hour clients. You think they want to meet in some cheap restaurant or drive around in a Toyota. They want to do business with a solvent company." I countered, "Which we won't be if." "Screw you, Alice." He kicked my visitor's chair across the room. "You're nothing but a jealous." He trailed off, his face twisted in anger. Who couldn't stand seeing me succeed? With that, he stormed out, leaving papers scattered across my floor. I knew exactly where this was heading. Sure enough, at Saturday at our family dinner, I could feel the tension as soon as I walked in. Mom was unusually quiet as she served the pot roast. Dad kept clearing his throat, his nervous tell. Finally, Mom couldn't hold back any more. "Alice, don't you think you're being a little harsh with your brother? He's worked so hard for the company." "Has he?" I reached for my briefcase. I'd come prepared for this. "Would you like to see exactly how Tommy's been working hard with company money?" I spread out the documents across the dining table, right next to Mom's best china. Credit card statements, expense reports, receipts, all carefully highlighted and annotated. This is the penthouse he rented with company funds. This is the Tesla he bought. Here are the Vegas trips, the designer shopping sprees, the $5,000 dinners. Mom shook her head. "He needs to entertain clients. With $1,200 swimming trunks?" I pointed to that particular receipt. "Or a $15,000 watch?" "Your brother has always had good instincts for business," Mom insisted. "He knows how to make people feel special." Dad had been silent, studying the documents with a deepening frown. "These numbers," he finally said. "Tommy, is this accurate?" Tommy, who'd been sulking at the other end of the table, shrugged. "It's all legitimate business expenses. Alice is just too rigid to understand how modern business works." "That's enough," Dad cut in. He looked tired, older somehow. Alice is right about the expenses, Tommy. They need to stop. He held up his hand when Tommy tried to protest. But she's also going to help you learn to run the company properly. I blinked in surprise. I am. My plan is to eventually split the company between you two 50-50. But that only works if you both know how to manage it. He looked at me pleadingly. Will you teach him? I looked at Tommy, who was staring at his plate, jaw clenched. Teaching him would be like teaching a cat to swim. But I heard myself saying, yes, I'll try. Looking at Tommy across the conference room table, I couldn't help but think about our childhood. While I was doing homework, he was racing his friends in the Porsche he got for his 16th birthday. When I spent summers learning the business, he was partying in the Hamptons. Mom and Dad always said he was living life to the fullest, while I was too serious. I remember the Christmas when I asked for accounting software to practice with, and they got me a sweater. Tommy got a jet ski. When I made honor roll, they nodded absent-mindedly. When Tommy managed to graduate with C's, they threw a massive party. It wasn't that they didn't love me. They just loved him more. Obviously, more demonstratively, more completely. Now, watching him slouch in his expensive chair during our budget meeting, I saw the results of that upbringing. Tommy, are you following these quarterly projections? I asked, trying to keep the frustration out of my voice. He glanced up from his phone. Yeah. Numbers going up is good, numbers going down is bad. Can we wrap this up? It's a bit more complex than that, I said. These projections affect our inventory decisions for the next 6 months. He sighed dramatically but put his phone down. Small victories. I made sure to invite him to every important meeting. Client negotiations. Supplier contracts. Strategy sessions. If it mattered to the company, I wanted him there. Most of the time, he just sat there looking bored, checking his watch or playing with his pen. But occasionally, he'd surprise me. Why don't we try importing luxury pet products? He suggested during one meeting. Rich people are crazy about their dogs these days. We could mark up the prices like crazy. The market's already saturated, I explained gently. And the certification process for pet products is complicated. Another time, we should invest everything in cryptocurrency. My friend made millions last month. Had to take a deep breath before responding to that one. We need more stable investments for company funds. His ideas were usually impractical or too risky, but at least he was thinking about the business. It was more engagement than I'd seen from him in years. During a meeting with our biggest client, he actually paid attention the whole time. Afterward, he said, you're pretty good at this. The way you handled their pricing concerns, it was probably the first genuine compliment he'd ever given me. Thanks, Tommy. Want to grab lunch and I can explain the negotiation strategy I used? Nah, got plans, he said, already heading for the door. But maybe next time. I watched him go, thinking about how patterns set in childhood become the architecture of our adult lives. Tommy never had to try because everything was handed to him. I always had to try twice as hard because nothing was. Now I was supposed to teach him what I'd spent years learning on my own. 8 years. 8 years of early mornings and late nights. 8 years of tough decisions and careful management. 8 years of teaching Tommy everything I knew while simultaneously running the company at peak performance. The numbers told the story better than I could. Profits up 300% since I took over. 5 new branches opened across the state. A client list that had tripled in size. Chin Global Trading wasn't just surviving anymore. It was thriving. Dad's 70th birthday party was supposed to be a celebration of all that success. The private room at Golden Palace Restaurant was packed with family, close friends, and our most important business partners. The same faces who'd watched our company grow from near bankruptcy to industry leader. I'd helped Mom plan every detail, from the traditional red decorations to Dad's favorite 8-course menu. Even Tommy had shown up on time for once. He'd been unusually quiet lately, but I figured he was just nervous about his presentation of our latest expansion plans. After the Peking duck was served, Dad stood up, tapping his glass with a spoon. The room fell silent. "I have an important announcement," he said, smiling at all of us. "After much thought, I've decided it's time for me to fully retire." There were murmurs of appreciation around the room. Dad had been semi-retired for years, ever since he made me CEO, but he still kept an office and came in for major decisions. "And so," he continued, "it's time to talk about succession, about legacy." My stomach tightened, sensing something in his voice. Chin Global Trading has been in our family for 3 generations, passed down from father to son. Today, I'm proud to announce that I'm transferring full ownership of the company to Tommy. The room erupted in applause. I sat there frozen as relatives congratulated my brother. This couldn't be happening. "Dad," I said, standing up. My voice cut through the celebrations. "What about our agreement? You promised to split the company between us." The room went quiet. Dad shrugged, not quite meeting my eyes. "The company has always passed through the male line, Alice. It's tradition. Besides, Tommy will make an excellent leader." Leader? I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I'm the one who saved this company. I'm the one who turned it around. Now, dear, Mom cut in. "Don't make a scene. Tommy has natural leadership abilities. He'll make a better owner than—" "Better." I laughed incredulously. Where was his natural leadership when the company was failing? Where was it during the 8 years I spent teaching him basic business concepts? Tommy stood up, straightening his tie. "Speaking of which, sis, you should start preparing to hand over your CEO duties. As the new owner, I'll be taking that position as well." He smirked at me across the table, the same smirk he'd had when he got that Porsche for his 16th birthday. When he took credit for my work in high school. When he spent company money like water because he knew he'd never face consequences. You know what? I stood up, my chair scraping against the floor. You all deserve each other. 8 years I spent fixing Dad's mistakes and covering Tommy's incompetence. 8 years of my life sacrificed for this family's legacy. Alice, Mom gasped. "How dare you be so selfish?" "Selfish?" I turned to face her. Was I being selfish when I worked 60-hour weeks to save the company? When I gave up my own career dreams? When I tried to teach Tommy despite knowing he'd never learn? "You're just envious," Dad said coldly. "You've always been jealous of your brother. Get out," Mom said, pointing to the door. "If you can't be happy for your brother's success, you can leave." I looked around the room, at my relatives' uncomfortable faces, at the business partners who wouldn't meet my eyes, at my family's expressions of righteous indignation. Gladly. The next morning, I walked into the office one last time to clear out my desk. Tommy was there, feet up on his new desk, my old desk, watching me pack. "Don't forget to leave your keys," he smirked. I dropped my resignation letter on his desk without a word. 8 years of my life packed into one cardboard box. Thankfully, I'd always lived well below my means. The savings I'd accumulated bought me a beautiful apartment in the historic district. I decided to take a few months off, something I hadn't done since college. The first signs of trouble at Chin Global Trading started 3 months later. Mrs. Rodriguez called me over coffee. "They fired me," she said, hands wrapped around her cup. Tommy said I was too old school in my accounting practices. Over the next few weeks, more calls came. Tommy had replaced most of the senior management with his college buddies. The new CFO was a guy he used to party with, who'd barely passed business school. "He's back to his old spending habits," reported James, my former VP of operations, who'd also been let go. bought himself a new Maserati as a company car, but that's not the worst part. The worst part, as it turned out, was Tommy's solution to their first major crisis. When their main supplier raised prices, instead of negotiating or finding a reputable alternative, Tommy switched to a sketchy supplier offering suspiciously low prices. "The products are garbage," Sarah from Quality Control told me before she, too, was fired. "Half of them are defective, but Tommy won't listen. Says we're being too picky." Within 6 months, the company had lost 3 major clients. Within 8 months, most of our long-term partners had jumped ship. The carefully built reputation I'd spent 8 years cultivating was crumbling in a matter of months. Heard it all through the grapevine, and I felt absolutely nothing. 1 year to the day after that fateful birthday dinner, my phone rang. Dad's name flashed on the screen. I almost didn't answer, but some remnant of daughterly duty made me pick up. "Alice," his voice sounded older, tired. "We need to talk." I waited, letting the silence stretch between us. "Tommy, he hasn't worked out as we hoped." He cleared his throat. "The company's in trouble. Real trouble." "I'm aware," I said flatly. "The business community isn't that big." I'd heard about their latest disasters through my professional network. "We need you back," he said. "You can name your terms. Full control. Whatever salary you want. Tommy will step aside." I couldn't help but laugh. "Now you want me back, after you threw away 8 years of my work because of tradition. This is our family's legacy, Alice. Your great-grandfather's company. You can't just let it die." "My great-grandfather's company died the day you chose your son's ego over your daughter's competence," I replied. "The company I built for 8 years? That's what's dying now, and I don't care." "How can you say that?" His voice rose. "This is your family's business. Your heritage. You have a responsibility." "No, Dad, I don't. Not anymore. You made your choice a year ago. Now you can live with it." "Alice, please." I hung up and blocked his number. Then unblocked Mom's number, too, for good measure. Looking out my office window at the Manhattan skyline, I smiled. My new business card read, "Alice Chen, Chief Executive Officer of Morton International, one of the largest import-export firms on the East Coast." I'd been headhunted for the position 6 months ago. Alice, my assistant, poked her head in. "The board members are ready for your presentation." I gathered my papers, straightening my jacket. The quarterly results were excellent. We'd exceeded all projections, and I had plans to expand into 3 new markets. "Your strategy for the Asian markets is brilliant," Richard Morton, the company owner, had told me last week. "Best decision I ever made bringing you on board." The irony wasn't lost on me. Here I was, doing exactly what I'd always wanted to do. Being valued for exactly who I was. No family drama. No emotional manipulation. No brothers to babysit. Just pure business, run well. News travels fast in family circles, even when you've cut off direct contact. It was my cousin Jennifer who told me over lunch exactly 2 years after I'd walked out of Golden Palace Restaurant. They filed for bankruptcy, she said, stirring her coffee. Tommy had to sell everything. The house, the Maserati, even that ridiculous watch collection of his. I took a sip of my wine, letting the information settle. And he's moved back in with Aunt Linda and Uncle James. They converted their home office into a bedroom for him. Jennifer hesitated. "They're saying it's temporary, just until he gets back on his feet." I could picture it perfectly. Tommy in his childhood bedroom, Mom making his favorite meals, Dad making excuses for him. Some patterns really do never change. The details emerged over the following weeks through various family channels. The company's collapse had been spectacular, not just a failure, but a cautionary tale whispered about in business circles for years to come. The defective products had led to lawsuits. The mismanaged funds had led to debt. The alienated partners had led to isolation. Everything I'd built over 8 years had been dismantled in less than 2, leaving nothing but debts and broken relationships. Your father had to remortgage their house to cover some of the debts, my Aunt Maria reported during our monthly phone call. They're saying you could have prevented this if you'd come back when they asked. I started to chuckle at that. Actually laughed loudly in my corner office with Central Park visible. Under my direction, Morton International has just had its best quarter in corporate history. Last month, the Wall Street Journal ran a story on me applauding my creative approach to foreign commercial ties. They're still not getting it, are they? I said to Maria. This isn't about me deserting them. This is about them never really appreciating what they owned. Later that evening, I watched the sunset over the city from my penthouse balcony, bought with my own money, acquired by my own merit. I considered Tommy, who was back in our parents' house, most likely still blaming everyone but himself for what occurred. I considered Mom, who chose favoritism over justice, and Dad, who put tradition before ability. I considered that old black and white picture of my great-grandfather had on display at the office. I questioned if it had been auctioned alongside everything else or whether they had managed to save it from the liquidators. On my phone, a notification showed up. Another positive assessment of our company's performance under my direction. The title was Morton International CEO Transforms Company Culture, a New Era of Growth. Should I start to feel guilty? They all expect something like this. The relatives that still correspond with me. The ancient family friends who muffle about the prodigal daughter, allowing the legacy of their family to fade. They believe I should be tormented inside by what happened. But I'm not, because this is the reality regarding legacies. They have nothing to do with family customs or even architectural design or brand names. They concern morals. My great-grandfather developed his firm on honesty, diligence, and real commercial sense. Those ideas survived Chin Global Trading. They lived on through me, simply in another form.